Now it's time to eat. What a beautiful day. Just walking into the beautiful park of Chicago. It looks so pretty.
Yeah. Ahorita. We keep taking turns. At the restaurant I did. Woo, Chicago. We love it. Right? Vente. Vamos a caminar por acá. Creo que va a tirar esto. The truck. Hasta las 7.
Y'all get a parking pass?
No. Yeah, and it was over at 7. Moy!
Now we on a boat ride, yeah.
The being after the Second World War and lasted late 1970s and early 80s. But let's get started. So near Michigan Avenue, here to our right coming up, the elegant white glazed terracotta-clad Wrigley Building. The section on the river, 1921, northern half, 1924. Spanish revivalist design, some French Renaissance elements. It's clad with 6 different shades of white glazed terracotta, fireproof baked clay. This is the building chewing gum built, designed by Graham Anderson, Probst & White. Double-decker Michigan Avenue Bridge of 1920. The tall reflective glass building right here in front, neon-like spire on top, is currently Chicago's second tallest building. The height does include the very top and tip of the spire. Trump International Hotel and Tower by Adrian Smith, former Skidmore, Owens & Merrill. A pretty good example of the contextual style. The building fits into the site and surrounding. The building itself ascends in height, yet setbacks at different levels that relate to the roof lines of surrounding structures. First setback to the roof line of Wrigley, second setback for a building across the river, and third setback for the building next door. Daytime hours, the glass is bright and reflective. When dark, it is clear and transparent. You see directly in this space. You would then notice the floors 4 through 12 of the parking garage for the building. During evening hours, you see these columns rising up behind the glass. 16 and 30, the hotel space. Then to the top are condominiums, built between 2005 and 2009. There to our left of that dome on top, initially called the Jewelers Building, was completed in 1926 to house some large jewelry firms. That dome on top, late 30s, early 40s, was a restaurant and bar called the Stratosphere. There's also rumor that when the building first opened, there was a speakeasy in that dome on top, often visited by Al Capone. The Al Capone part is a rumor, but it's a rumor that I spread. To our right, the steel and glass Miesian and modernist black box was in fact designed by one of the fathers of modern and international architecture, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. His very famous motto was less is more. Mies came to Chicago from Germany back in the late 30s, became head of architecture at IIT. He designed the Seagram Building in New York City, TD Center in Toronto, Lafayette Park in Detroit, and the Barcelona chairs. As we near State Street, to our right coming up, commonly referred to being the twin corn cob towers. In reality, we're going to have Marina City. Built between 1960 and 64, designed by architect Bertrand Goldberg, who in fact went to Germany to study under Mies van der Rohe at a school called the Bauhaus. So in this area, we're going to have teacher and student side by side. About 18 floors of both buildings are parking, a proportion are condominiums, 16 petals per floor. Former office building, now a hotel. Former theater, now the House of Blues. Small shops and restaurants on site. Marina style of architecture, the tripartite design. Think of a Greek column that have a base, shaft, capital on top. The base of the building visually anchors the structure of the ground. The shaft draws your eye up. The corners from on the top to finish things off. A tea and coffee warehouse was completed in 1912. Glass penthouse, 1984. You're going to notice base, shaft, capital on many buildings, old and new, including this unbelievably huge and this ginormous building to our right called the Merchandise Mart by Graham Anderson, Probst & White, Art Deco style. Limestone cladding, streamlined verticality, set back to the building rises. But completed back in 1930, at that time, this was the world's largest building, having more than 4 million square feet of space within its walls. So massive, like 14, 15 years ago, the building had its own zip code. 60654, now being shared throughout the area. And those 8 bronze busts, they represent some of the prince merchants of the United States, including Philemon, Woolworth, Wanamaker, Marshall Field, and a few more. The building was commissioned for and by the president of the Marshall Field organization. It was going to be their wholesale warehouse and distribution center. Their plans did not fully materialize because 1930, the country was at the height of the Great Depression. They sold the building in 1945 for a fraction of its value to Joseph Kennedy, father of President John Kennedy. They sold the building in 1998. We're now at Wolf Point where the 3 branches come together. Main branch we came down, north branch to our right, south branch to our left. This whole area has transitioned dramatically over the past 8 years. Brand new, brand new, brand in the background, brand new there, brand new, brand new. 6 new buildings around here over the past 8 years. The most recent addition, the one here to our right coming up, roughly 60-story Salesforce Tower, rising to a height of roughly 850 feet, completed last summer. If you don't have time while you're here, visit the plaza in front. The elevator gives you great views in the main branch canyon to our east. The building right here in front is called River Bend from 2016. They did that sculpture in front about 4.5, 5 years ago. It was called Constellation by Santiago Calatrava. Mirror building to our left, lantern on top. This sits in a very historic site. Back in 1860, a temporary building stood on that site called the Wigwam. It was the very first ever Republican National Convention where Abraham Lincoln was nominated. Now, coming up to our right, the building draws everyone's attention. Total diva of this area, 150 North Riverside by Getch Partners, architecture firm headquartered here. Building itself a pretty good example of form follows function. The site was to dictate the shape and design of the building. Here, a very slender piece of land to work with. You're wedged in between the river and train tracks. At a conventional office building, been designed where the columns come straight down. On this side, those columns will slam along the river's edge. On the other side, into the train tracks. This is called a core-supported building. The main central concrete core takes on the weight and load of the tower. Those diagonal beams transfer that load. Example, hold my arm off of my body, push down on my hand, it's gonna fall right to my thigh. If there's a bar from my palm to my waist, you can't push down. Same general concept with the diagonals. The building itself opened up in 2017. I'll tell you more on the return trip. Ever have time while you're here, walk through that space. As we clear Randolph to our left coming up, 5.5, 6 years ago, a 5-story building from the mid-1950s. Thankfully, it's been torn down, and its width now rises. A 55-story tall building, 110 North Wagner by Getch Partners. Same firm, with the depot with a very cool base. Building here to our left, also a very dynamic base. Completed in 2020 for this one, last I have read, like 90 to 95% leased up. Right now, largest tenant is Bank of America. Here to our left is Bank of America Tower. And here's a picture of the building that stood on this site that I took before it got torn down. I don't miss it, and neither do you, because it was ugly. It was. So as we clear Washington and into this Art Deco Canyon, to our left coming up, the Civic Opera Building by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. Limestone cladding, set back to the building rises. You'll notice it kind of reminds you of a giant chair or a throne. Seat portion of the theater and stage, the wings of the building are the armrest, the tower your backrest. Did not misspell building, that's Latin. Chiseled here in my lifetime. Blank wall to our left, a bit more than 20 years ago. Some minor consideration about perhaps showing movies on the wall, watching the plaza across the way. Nothing materialized. Gonna have some carvings here, and more carvings above of comedy and tragedy. It was tragic that $20 million building opened up November 4th, 1929. A few days into the stock market crash, leading to the Great Depression, Civic Opera went bankrupt soon after. It's now home to the Lyric Opera. They're very successful. Back to our right. So around here you can see Below, the next set of buildings, now to the basement, the train tracks. All the buildings to our right along the river are built atop air rights. And that means the developers bought the air above the train tracks from the railroad companies to build and develop buildings above that space. Very common in big cities. Huge project right now being built in Manhattan called Hudson Yards, all on air rights. Gonna have gateway centers 1 and 2, 65, 67, Black Box Modern, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Background to our right, green glass, black cladding, modern, 83, Skidmore. Taller stone, clad building to our right, postmodern, 1992, Skidmore. So all 4 buildings by the same firm, 65 to 92. And evolution of architecture by one firm over 25 to 30 years. Again, track below, lead to and from Union Station. A short, classically inspired building, about a quarter of a block to our right, next gap, 1925. I know that most of you all aren't from Chicago, but some of you all, especially adults of a certain age, have seen some of these buildings on TV. You may not realize it. If any of you all have ever seen The Untouchables, 1987, Sean Connery, Kevin Costner, there's a scene at the end where the baby stroller falling down the stair steps in a shootout that was filmed in the Great Hall of Union Station. Very nice public space. Ever have time, check it out. Making our way right now beneath Adams Street, aka Route 66. That one time, a beautiful grand concourse of the train station stood directly here to our right. But in the name of modernization, it was stupidly torn down back in 1969, replaced with the mediocre Gateway Center 3, 1971. A little short 3-story building to our right now houses a health club and corner bakery. Initially, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And back then, pre-computer, given exchange, had a big old trading floor. Those big trading floors that did not like a lot of interior support columns that would get in the way. Instead of using interior supports, the exits around the outside do the majority of the supporting. X-bracing, just like the John Hancock Center on North Michigan Avenue. John Hancock vertical, that's horizontal. I will discuss the building to our left, small red dot on the return trip. But as we clear Jackson to our right, the 4th and final of the Gateway buildings, 1983, by Jim DeStefano, who at that time worked for Skidmore. Again, pretty good example of architectural contextualism. The building within the site and surrounding. A graceful curve in the facade, a slight bend in the river in front of us. Green glass of the building, green water of the river. I know, at least a third of you all, at one point in your life, the last 14, 15 years, have possibly seen The Dark Knight, the Batman movie filmed in Chicago. Opening scene, Joker and his gang, they're gonna rob Gotham National Bank. They bust out a window in the office building here to our right. Use a zip line on the rooftop of Gotham National Bank where they bust him with a school bus. That's next, but in reality, the former main post office of the city of Chicago. Built in phases and finally completed back in 1932. Art Deco, Graham Anderson, probes to the right. It was the world's busiest and biggest post office. Chicago needed the biggest, who were the mail order and catalog capital of the world. With stores like Sears, Marshall Field, Montgomery Ward, all using catalogs in their heyday. You're talking roughly 2.7 million square feet of space, about 62 acres all under one roof, the perfect spot, on top of train tracks. Building itself decommissioned back in 1996, sat empty for more than 2 decades. Purchased back in 2016.